welcome to the table representatives of the Australian Football League. Thank you. Thank you. I've lost my cheat sheet. Thank you very much, Mr. Gillan McLaughlin and Mr. Simon Lethlean from the Australian Football League. Thank you for coming along to talk to us today. The committee has received your submission as submission number 26. Do you wish to make any amendments or alterations to your submission?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Do you wish to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions?
I do, and I apologise in advance, Chair, for potentially repeating some of what we talked about in the question and answer before. I guess I'd thank you for the opportunity to present. I guess I want to make 3 points at the outset. The first, I think, is certainly now well known, and we're similar to all of our peers of before, that we're a not-for-profit entity, and all surpluses go back either to our clubs, to community programs, facilities, and other programs. And what I'll do is I'll table with the Enquiry a list of next generation strategy papers, which essentially outline where all of our funds go and the initiatives being undertaken over a 5-year period. I guess the second point I'd make is that the heart of those monies and the heart of our business is intellectual property and the protection of that, and that's not only the vision and the audio and the images, but also our trademarks and our designs, and that really is the business we're in, protecting our copyright and protecting our intellectual property. The third thing I'd say is that we absolutely support the freedom of the press and the role of the media in promoting, reporting on our game. And I think I talked earlier, to that end, we have around 750 accredited media. We've got over 600 media who actually support those accredited media in terms of backup crews and others. This is not about freedom of the press or the role of the press. I guess moreover, it's not about the reporting of news exceptions in the Copyright Act. We support both of these absolutely, and ultimately the media are our key partners. What today is about is, and as you have sort of talked about in the excellent terms of reference, you clearly articulate, acknowledge that it's about the balance between commercial and public interests in the reporting and broadcasting of sports news. And it's about legislation and this is the copyright legislation, which originated in an analogue linear world and which is now exploited in a digital world in a way that was never contemplated. I guess it's essentially legislation that has not kept up, allowing the key driver of sports business models, protection of their IP, to be undermined. And I guess this is exacerbated by the ease with which content can be appropriated in the digital environment, the multiple digital platforms on which content can be easily disseminated, and the high cost of policing infringement and enforcing copyright through litigation. I guess succinctly is our issues about the extent of the use of our copyrighted material and the breadth of it, and how we find the balance, which I talked about earlier. It plays directly into the question of an entertainment offering versus a news offering, and goes to the heart of the protection of our IP. Because, as I said earlier, in the end, this is all we have. So today is critical to the survival of the sporting bodies represented here today. Do we find the right balance? The imbalance of power between the media and the not-for-profit sporting entities means that we cannot find the balance ourselves using accreditation, as we cannot live without the coverage they threaten to deny us when they don't accept our accreditation terms. And this is the irony, I guess, and Senator Birmingham talked to it before. We need an independent free press so much that we cannot self-regulate to stop them abusing our intellectual property. So in the end, we looked for legislative leadership to determine what this balance is. We all need news reported and reported independently, but this cannot be at the expense of the right to protect one's intellectual property, in this case specifically copyright. We look for clarity, and in this context note that the fair dealing doctrine is an exemption for breaching copyright and reporting news, and not a right, and additionally by definition it must be fair. We've outlined a proposed set of reforms in our submission that go to volume, frequency and duration, as well as speaks to commercialisation of our content. I look forward to any questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr McLaughlin. Mr Lethlean, you didn't wish to add anything to that?
Nothing to add at this stage.
Thanks very much. Okay, Mr McLaughlin, sports organisations say that if something isn't done, their revenue is going to be affected. But I think last week you were talking up AFL's broadcasting rights as being in the order of $1 billion for the next round. So it doesn't seem to us like...
I had to wear that, Senator. Just to clarify, I was asked would we like to get $1 billion, and I said I'd like to get $1 billion, but we can hope.
Okay. Well, I think it was $700 million last time?
In the order, yeah.
Okay. Do you expect that amount of money to go down or up?
No, we're very confident in the value of our media rights. I guess we're still, the vast majority of that comes from a traditional environment of free-to-air and pay television. Our real concern is as the speed of our broadband evolves, as the internet and mobile technology grows as I guess a more mainstream and a contemporary tool, how those revenues may be undermined and how ultimately, as we look to the future, what will happen ongoing.
But there's no evidence yet then that the amount of revenue that you can earn from broadcasting rights has been affected?
No, I would say it's already been affected. I actually say that we are losing revenue currently because of the way the legislation is structured. I think if you look at the fact that some organisations are syndicating our content and on-selling it to other news organisations, the fact that some companies are selling photos online, selling galleries that are not accredited, that some companies are, that are running ads at the front and back end of our vision, essentially using in an entertainment offer, archiving that vision, that undermines all of our new media partners' rights in Telstra, and essentially the money we currently see is undermined by that. But
where is it affecting you as a sport? Show me that the current situation has meant that that the AFL teams can't play their players as much as they used to. Show me that you're not contributing as much money to, programs for youngsters who want to play football. Where is the actual detriment being manifest?
It's in the new media space. I guess, Senator, I'm not saying that our business isn't growing, but this is an incredibly important part. Over 50%, if I take one step back, over 50% of our revenues are coming from media broadly, and this is an evolving and emerging space. And this continues to undermine rights we sell in the new media space, and as this platform grows, it will continue to have a larger and larger impact and actually inhibit our ability to grow. I don't think we're representing that ultimately it's the end of sporting bodies we know and the end of the AFL, but it actually has a significant impact on our business now and will be increasing impact going forward.
Can I just touch on a point there in relation to that? You said that it's already affecting your revenue. When you say it's already affecting your revenue, you're just talking about, the income that you hope you will receive and so on for the forthcoming year. Are you talking about it's already affecting your revenue or potential revenue?
I think both, Senator. I think that at the moment we are not receiving money we should be receiving in a number of instances, and I talk to those whether it's in a selling of photographic images that other entities are selling of our game, whether it's the amount we are receiving for our new media rights. I think if we were able to give certainty in this space, then we will be able to derive more revenue, and I think ongoing it will have an impact on our revenue.
So your argument really is about potential revenue. You haven't seen a decrease in your income. You're talking about possible areas that you can pick up on, possible areas you can pick up on. No, but I think in the current, in the present sense, we are writing less revenue now than we should be because of the ability for media organisations to commercialise our content under the guise of the fair dealing provisions.
If the laws were as you would like them to be, do you believe that Telstra or some other partner through mobile technology would be paying more than Telstra currently pays you?
That's my proposition, yeah.
Right. Sorry, Chair.
Sorry. Senator Lundy.
Thank you. Who have you excluded from your venues? What examples of?
We haven't excluded any.
Have you excluded some photographers from your venues?
For 2 years ago, in 2005 and 2006, AAP were accredited photographers. They hadn't asked for accreditation before that. Then when there was an issue around change of a photographic supplier, and AAP refused to. They were very comfortable when Getty were the supplier. They weren't happy when there was a change to Jeff Slattery Publishing.
Sorry, so why were they excluded?
Because they're not a publisher of news, they're a syndicator of content, and I think in their submission they talk about the fact that they're selling those images to other entities. We accredited their journalists, all their journalists are allowed to come in and cover the game, but in terms of actually selling those photographs, we were very happy for them to continue to be provided the photographs.
Some of those photographs would have been used for news purposes?
Yes, sold to newspaper companies.
Right. So that's for news?
Yes, but the images are equally available from any number of sources for sale.
So why
essentially,
would you
we were restricting someone who was syndicating and selling our photographs.
Just to clarify that, we didn't exclude them from entering the grounds. They wouldn't agree to our accreditation terms by which they weren't able to syndicate to non-news reporting agencies.
Right. So you set terms that weren't...
Terms that everyone else agreed to.
Okay. It's a bit semantic, but they certainly felt that they were excluded on the basis that you came up with new restrictions about what they could do that they couldn't agree to.
I think there were terms and conditions that are standard across all sports now that move with the times to deal with the digital platforms and how our content and sports content was being syndicated and packaged and sold for non-news reporting purposes.
I just want to go back a step as far as the AFL's concerns about the potential impact on your sport. Because we're dealing with a whole raft of new forms of media in a digital environment, it seems to me that the AFL is trying to reach in and ask that copyright provisions be extended into this new area, so as providing the AFL with a far greater degree of control for the purposes of deriving some revenues from it. Is that an accurate description as to what you're trying to achieve?
No, we're not asking the copyright provisions to be altered at all. I guess what we're asking for is that the exceptions to the copyright be more prescriptive to stop the abuse. We haven't shied away from the fact that selling photographs, selling vision is at the heart of our business, and the example with AAP was that they're actually selling those photographs. News Limited and Fairfax and all of those companies where they're using those photographs for the reporting of news, we accredit them, and they are at every game today.
Can I just clarify? The AFL is very comfortable with its copyright ownership in its vision, which it organises through contractual arrangements with our broadcasters. We're also very comfortable with the extent of our accreditation terms as we can currently achieve them by way of making conditional copyright arrangements with our news reporters. We aren't comfortable with how that copyright is being exploited for the purpose of reporting news, and which is what we're seeking clarity on. We're not seeking clarity on our copyright ownership.
Can we just get clarification? What was your concern with AAP? They were selling the photographs to...
Other syndicated. They syndicated that content and on-sold to other...
Media organisations?
Yeah.
And you had a problem with the fact that they were selling them to other media news organisations who weren't able to be there?
No, but they often could be there. They also had other media organisations. There is a supplier of photographs who sells those photos to that entity, and that's essentially what we do. Is actually sell images in our content.
You're now in the business of hiring professional photographers for the purposes of supplying the demand of the news media.
If they are not able to send photographers themselves.
But they were, and you excluded them.
No, they weren't simply using those photographs themselves. They were syndicating that content.
But that's what you're doing if you're selling them yourselves.
That's right. That's what we see our business as doing, selling our content, there's a distinction here. If someone wants to report the news and come and take photographs and publish those in their papers, we're absolutely comfortable with that. And we've not, there's been no example I know of any accreditation's been knocked out on that basis. Similarly, the AAP print journalists were absolutely and still accredited to this day. But in terms of actually taking photographs and then on selling them to other parties, we see that as part of our business.
What about country newspapers?
Yes.
So I understand that was an example that you didn't want the AAP to on-sell them to country newspapers. Was that?
No, that's not true.
We never had an issue with AAP or Getty selling photographs for the purpose of reporting news to anybody that was a news reporting agency. The issue was they weren't prepared to deal with the second arm of our accreditation terms, is what they do on a commercial aspect with that. For instance, selling a photo of a footballer for use in posters in news agents or stores. Commercial gain activities, not news reporting activities.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with AAP on selling to country newspapers
and those
or other
country
media
newspapers still have the
organisations.
exact same access they had by way of our licensed accredited agency.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sorry, isn't that how news agencies do business though? I mean, someone takes the photos and other news agencies buy those photos?
For reporting for news, yes.
Yeah.
But not for commercial sale.
But if someone is providing news content, how do you know and how can you make the distinction up front?
Well, I mean, do you pay $10 for a post or reply that has no news attached to it? That's a commercial venture that as sports rights holders in that content we should be able to
So there's
sell.
no such thing as photojournalism?
Oh, I don't think I said that.
No, I know, but that's the implication of your answer, that there is no intrinsic reporting value within a photograph
I think
or an
we've said
image.
that we're comfortable with the news agencies owning copyright in their photographs so long as the conditions that they agree to are adhered to in reporting news with those photos. If you look at print newspapers currently reporting on a match and showing 3 photos in the newspaper as compared to a 40-photo gallery online, there's a clear distinction there in the fact that the news reporting has changed on both those platforms.
So what is it that you want from the digital space and the use of images in the digital space? Do you want to control it? I asked this question of cricket. Do you want to control it
I don't think
completely?
We're
Do you want a share of the revenues from it? Or do you want to...
I think Gil can talk
what do you want to do?
Gil can talk to the share of the revenue side of things, but I think we've enunciated a couple of times now, we're not seeking to control the news reporting. We're not seeking for a definition of what is news. We're seeking some clarity and a definition around what is fair use of sports content which is owned by the AFL or other sports or news agencies themselves, and how that can be applied to reporting news. We're not seeking to define news. I guess Gil can talk to the revenue side of things.
But in essence you are, because when you say defining fair use of content that everyone, for all intents and purposes, are in full agreement forms part of what constitutes news in a digital environment, essentially you are asking for a definition of what constitutes news in its multimedia formats.
I don't think we all agree on the use. I think we're all at odds about what the use is.
No, but I meant that we all agree that news is news, and I haven't heard any objection from anyone that having a news package about your sport is in some way not desirable. Your complaint is how when you get beyond that, elements of that package, i.e. footage, could be exploited subsequently.
In the end, Senator, what we're talking about is again this question of balance. We very clearly, and through our history of accrediting journalists and promoting the coverage of our sport, encourage the widest possible coverage of our game. The issue is where that bleeds over into media organisations doing what they do and monetising that content and essentially monetising our intellectual property.
As opposed to you monetising it.
Exactly right, that's our content, and that's what we're not shying away from that. This is our content, and that we run a business. We're a not-for-profit entity, that everything goes back into the community. Our business is to monetise our content and to put that money back into the community and everything where we do it. And the media companies, very clearly, are there to monetise the media. And where it goes from reporting of news to actually the commercialisation of our content is what we're talking about here. It's at the margin and it's difficult, but...
I put to you, going back to you said the core of your business is your intellectual property.
Yes.
I put to you that the core of your business is you know, content and described by what you call your intellectual property right. But in fact, given the economies of sport, i.e. you get revenues from broadcasting rights, which are driven by the fact that you have a sponsor in place that has value because of the broadcasting rights. So it all kind of, you know, fits together as a sport. That it's actually in the interests of your sources of revenue, i.e. your sponsors and your broadcasting rights holder, that content proliferate anyway.
Yeah.
And that competing interest against the AFL's interest of deriving revenues from the production of your own digital content is actually at cross purposes.
It's a delicate balance.
Will there ever be a point where your digital content, revenue from your digital content that you produce and manage, will outstrip what your sport earns from both your sponsorship and your broadcast rights revenue? Because that's what you're contending.
I don't make a distinction between new media, digital rights or broadcast rights. In about 5 or 6 years, or certainly with the national broadband rollout, they'll be the same thing. It's the era of distinguishing between pushing media out over different platforms is about to be useless here, and it's certainly in some countries, certainly the Olympics now sell slots rather than by platform. So I don't make that distinction. So if you get to the fact that our broadcast rights, broadly, they are the heart of our business, and they're more, by multiple, more than any of our sponsorship.
Can I just go to the point about your internet rights and Telstra? How does that arrangement work with Telstra as far as they're procuring that feed to mobile devices and the internet?
So they have an exclusive licence in what is the non-free-to-air and non-pay television space, essentially is the best way of describing it. So in new media, which is both the internet and mobile, they pick up the signal from our free-to-air partners. They're subject contractually to a holdback, and then they have within that holdback, they have a series of number of minutes that they are able to show highlights packages and distribute over those platforms.
So what does Telstra pay for those rights?
It's a confidential number, but it's millions of dollars.
And I presume that those rights are sold on the basis of, the news reporting regime is still out there and functioning. So this is something in additional to news reporting.
Yeah, it's an exclusive offer of vision, which is more and more. This is to the point I made earlier about actually defining what's an entertainment offer and an exclusive package of highlights as opposed to news is very blurry at the moment, and we have a strong view, as you might be able to tell, about where that is, but it's very difficult for us, a variety of reasons, to enforce it.
And look, just to finish, can you describe to the committee what Telstra have paid for and how that differs specifically to news reporting of your content?
So they've essentially paid for the exclusive right to distribute our content, our intellectual property, as we can defend it, online and on the mobile. So that's a whole series of things that actually is exclusive content. It's our audio streams of the radio broadcasts, our intellectual property in the Guernseys and the jumpers and the logos, and our match vision to the extent we can protect it. And that's, to the extent that we can, is getting increasingly difficult with the use of this fair dealing provision.
So have Telstra initiated any litigation with respect to any claims they have of breach of their right?
Yes, they have. And Shane Tiskey talked to it earlier. It was an action against News Limited.
Likewise, Telstra brought the AFL into a proceeding against News Limited 4 months ago about streaming of links from their news websites straight to YouTube, which was seen to be outside the fair dealing provisions, which was settled out before it went to court. So
what role have Telstra played in arguing for the AFL to take a stronger position on the protection of digital rights in this regard?
I think their position is clear but again, like a lot of media companies, at different points they're rights owners and at different times they're media companies wanting to use the fair dealing provisions. I don't think that our position is any way affected by the views of Telstra. They're very strong in that this goes to the heart of our business, and we need protection. We want
Well, I think
freedom
it's
of press.
interesting that they've brought an action, but we haven't received a submission from them.
Yeah, I can't comment on that.
You said that Telstra brought an action against News Limited and it was settled out of court. I'm just wondering if there was that provision for that to be able to occur, why do you see that there needs to be changes to address those issues?
Well, I think that's a discussion that can be had at length. I mean, in short, it's an expensive exercise to seek litigation to enforce your rights. It was a 6-month process for one infringement on 2 websites that cost 6-figure sums in legal fees only to get to court to then be settled. So if we want to instigate those proceedings every time there's a breach of, I guess, undefined and unregulated guidelines around an exception to the Copyright Act, then we're going to be pretty busy and incurring a great deal of expense.
The other comment I'd make, Senator, is that it also assumes that we're happy with the settlement that was reached. These are media companies reaching settlements between each other, and I don't think that actually necessarily translate the AFL was happy with the settlement that was reached.
Are you under any pressure from Telstra with respect to future sponsorships or future broadcast rights? Sorry, I'll get this right. Are you under any pressure from Telstra with respect to their internet and mobile rights to resolve this issue?
I don't think we're under specific pressure from Telstra. I think the whole ability to sell broadcast rights on mobile and new media platforms is uncertain without resolution of this issue. And ultimately, if it can be exploited by all media companies and commercialised beyond what I believe is a fair reporting of news, then this area, as I talked to before, will always be an area where other people are making money exploiting our rights, in our view.
I don't think Telstra actually think that we'll resolve the issue either. I think they're just seeking some clarity on what they're buying conditionally, and they're buying that conditionally based on the exceptions to the Copyright Act.
Thank you. Do need to wind up, Senator. Senator Birmingham, you can have one last shot.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, thank you, Chair. Indeed, we had an instance about 10 years ago of a media company attempting to set up a sporting league. It didn't work out so well, but
I've heard of it, I think.
do you foresee the type of instance in the future where sporting leagues are acting increasingly like media companies in terms of the provision of vision themselves that extends beyond even the type of photographic content that you were just discussing with Senator Lundy?
If you look at the internationally, there is some examples of where that happens as sporting leagues continue to grow in terms of playing different roles in the broadcasting of their product and being broadcasters. I think it's plausible. That is different though from being a news organisation. So we see a great distinction being a broadcaster and having a role in broadcasting your games as opposed to reporting news and reporting the outcomes of the games, the results, the highlights, and we'll never be able to usurp that. Whether we play a role in the broadcast of our games, it's not in the short-term radar, but if you look internationally, there is some examples of it.
In your submission, you go to some length with Real Footy as an example. Now, you accredit Fairfax to come in and take pictures, and you recognise those Fairfax photographers as photographers for The Age and the SMH and the Fin and other Fairfax publications and presumably Real Footy. Is that correct? You recognise their accreditation across all Fairfax media?
Yes.
Now, you say in your submission that the use of the photographic images in the way that Real Footy uses them is in contravention of AFL's accreditation arrangements and damages the AFL's ability to license the online and mobile photographic image rights of AFL matches. Ignoring the latter part of that about it damaging your ability, but the specific contravention of accreditation arrangements. In what way is Real Footy breaching Fairfax's accreditation arrangements?
in the broader sense, they're accredited to report the news of the game. In our view, the way that that's actually translating when there are 30-odd images of a game still up some 2 weeks after the event, and ultimately they're creating a gallery of images, creating a portal of content, is where the abuse comes. So I might want to talk more specifically about that, but that goes to the three things we have. It's the volume, whether it's the volume of images up there, whether it's vision or static images, the length of time they're up there, and the amount of the frequency of that. And ultimately then when you continue to aggregate all of this content, at some point it goes beyond reporting news to actually creating a portal of content that can be commercialised, and that's where we see our role, is actually commercialising our content. Now, it just doesn't. That's the real heart of this, about actually, given this non-linear platform where people can pull information down and people can aggregate it, and there's minutes of vision and hundreds of photos, and it actually just creates they become essentially someone who's reselling AFL content rather than actually just strictly reporting of news.
Have you taken
and that ultimately is at the heart of it. We see these media organisations being quasi-rights holders and commercialising these rights online that we see as our domain.
Have you taken up what you see as a breach of accreditation with Fairfax?
Yeah, we certainly have, and I guess their response, in short, is you can't tell us how to report news. And I guess in the current environment we can't. We can express that we believe it's a breach of our copyright and a breach of the exemptions under the Copyright Act, but the next step then is to start proceedings and take litigation to
And Senator, that goes to the heart of it. I think you talked about, I think James talked about a blunt instrument. We have two approaches: accreditation, which we could control access, or litigation. Neither of them are very palatable. We need the media, we want the media there covering our games and reporting them. I mean, it's not sort of trite to say that. They're very important to us, and they are our partners. So we need them, and given they're partners, we don't want to be in court with them. Plus, it's a long and expensive process.
So Fairfax's response to you has basically been, well, throw us out if you game, or take us to court if you game.
That would be their response, and we've had very casual discussions about it. It's the response certainly at the time of dealing with accreditation, which is always in November of the off-season. We've gone through many iterations of how those terms look, from far more bullish versions to the one we actually settle on, and discussions do lead down the path that they won't agree to such restrictions, and inevitably they're parred back, and we then deal with things as matters arise.
Okay. Now, in terms of the type of restrictions you've proposed and you've outlined to potential reforms in your submission, and reform two you've outlined in some detail with restrictions that you would apply to in-match content A through F, and then I note that point F has some 6 subpoints to it, which are quite a range of restrictions. Some of those are restricting things that have been long accepted practice in traditional media. The retail sale of photographs. Now, News Limited and Fairfax and so on have long sold via retail means photographs that they've taken. Inserting advertising into content, there can be an argument as to exactly what the definition of inserting necessarily is there, but my footy lift out of the advertiser could just as easily be sponsored by the Holden Commodore, which is in direct competition, of course, with your major naming rights sponsor. Why should, in these instances, potentially tougher restrictions be applied just because of a digital environment than have applied to a traditional media environment?
I'd say, first thing, the respect to the images and the sale of those images, that's still in breach of their accreditation. It's just the imbalance of power and our reluctance to stop the accreditation of the journalists because we want them there covering a game. We've always had an issue with that. So currently the accreditation which News Limited operates under actually prohibits the resale of their photographs. They do it anyway, and we've long accepted that as part of it because they are a key partner for us, and we need them and they need us, and we have a very good relationship. But with respect to then this is the balance. They have a different strategic agenda to us in this area, and it comes down to the heart of actually, when and how they start, in our view, monetising our content rather than using it as a supplement to report the news. And our views might be prescriptive and might be strong, but we believe that actually you don't, using photographs to supplement your story is very different from them selling a gallery. Using our vision to tell a news story in the context of reporting on a game and actually adding the colour to that story is different from then running ads before and after that and actually using almost selling that piece. Different from using our vision to put a syndicated package of AFL content together, then on selling it to other mobile operators, wireless operators, as currently happens. Now, all of these forms are actually examples of them commercialising our content to other third parties, either sponsors, advertisers, consumers, other companies, as opposed to using that to add to the flavour of them reporting the news on our event.
And all of which, I might add, put us in breach of other arrangements with sponsors and other content providers, which we have licences with, which we would need to then go and enforce if we sought to try and enforce that under the copyright exclusions.
Just last thing, I should have asked this of comps, but have comps, or have you, on a bilateral basis with other organisations, considered joining together to try to establish sufficient resources to pursue a test case at any stage to see whether the current laws are actually satisfactory?
We haven't organised it. We haven't talked specifically amongst the comps group about that. I would say, as you might see today, there are different views within comps. Very broadly, we're completely aligned. Even broadly, we're completely aligned. But in terms of the way to proceed, I think we have different views.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you.
Again, trying to get inside your head as an organisation to understand where you're coming from here. Is your aim to try and control your content to maximise your ability to sell the rights to other parties? Or is your business strategy to hold on to that content yourself for the purposes of being a distributor, i.e. of sale of photographs yourselves? Or is it a combination of both?
Well, I think the model depends in terms of actually commercialise it. Sometimes we might sell ourselves, sometimes we might be a licensor. So there's a distinction between, we would never try and stop news reporting. Never have, never will, and as I said before, it's incredibly important to us.
No, that's not my question.
Let's then step to your question about how we monetise our intellectual property, whether it's vision or photographs, would differ depending on the model. So, we may then decide that we would sell our photos directly to people who wanted to, who had a need for those, whether they're consumers or others. We may license that to a third party to do that, depending on the risk, the views of the business and others, and it would depend on a case-by-case basis.
Isn't the challenge ultimately for the AFL to just have the best website and to continue to innovate, given the big lesson of the internet is that you can't control it and that content will continue to proliferate despite the grand efforts of every government around the whole world in trying to lock down content?
I think...
No, I know, but it is the challenge of every policy that every government tries in this area. It's extremely difficult to do, and ultimately the industry, and music is a great example, the industry adapts.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think
through innovation,
the internet continues. A view about how you actually monetise the internet continues to evolve, and it's different now than it was 6 months ago, and it will be again different in 12 months. I guess how we go to market on that platform is an evolving view, and as the platform evolves. In the end, though, I guess we come back to this is our views around. In the end, we own the vision, and we own the copyright in that vision, and other people using that and monetising that is what we have issue with. And that's the same whether it's on the digital, it's exacerbated by the digital space, but on any platform.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you, Senators, for your questions, and thank you in particular, Mr. Lethlean and Mr. McLaughlin, for answering those questions and for your submission and for your attendance at the committee hearing today. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senators.
The committee will suspend for lunch and resume proceedings at 2 o'clock.